Thank you very much. Please show the agenda again. Here's the first item on the agenda is our welcome, and we're glad you're with us today. It looks like we have a pretty full group, not to be unexpected. First item on the agenda will be a recap and introduction by Carol Ward. Following that, we'll have Enhanced Aquifer Recharge by Keith Nelson, a senior research hydrologist with ADWR. And Carol will take back over again for Storage Site Subcommittee update. So please proceed, Carol. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wade. Happy to have all of you with us again here this morning. As the chair mentioned, I will provide a brief recap of the committee's recent activities, tee up where we are headed, and introduce today's presentation and discussion topic. At the last meeting of this committee, Sandy Favorites and Vinitha Kartha of Freeport-McMoRan provided a report of the subcommittee's work to review and document past and current funding mechanisms in Arizona, mechanisms used by other southwestern states and other countries, and federal funding. Daniel Dialesi of the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority described the state revolving funds and the planned implementation of the state's Water Supply Development Fund. Shortly following the last Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee meeting, the FY22 state budget passed, including historic funding for Arizona water augmentation efforts. The Water Supply Development Fund received $46 million, and $160 million was provided to establish the Drought Mitigation Revolving Fund. The department has published a short summary of these funds on the council website. Jenna will drop a link in the chat for your convenience. Several other important water-related initiatives were also funded, signaling at the state level that Arizona has stepped up to the plate to help support these efforts. We'd like to extend, again, our gratitude to Speaker Bowers, Representative Griffin, the governor, and all of those who worked so hard to secure this funding. Next slide, please. At the most recent meeting of the Council, Director Bushatsky noted there was a legislative committee created in 2012 to explore and discuss the potential for what is often termed macro rainwater harvesting. However, that committee never convened. Director Bushatsky stated that he believes it is now time to reinitiate those discussions. He said that it is important to consider the possibility and perhaps necessity of enhanced stormwater recharge projects in the context of the hotter, drier future that may already be upon us, while still acknowledging the concerns regarding surface water rights that have been raised in the past. He committed to reach out to the chair of the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee and said that perhaps through this committee we can further pursue the policy issues and technical issues related to that topic. He closed by saying, in light of the challenges we are facing, the persistent drought, and the funding opportunities now available, we are at a point when we should resurrect that discussion in a meaningful way. So, with the support and guidance of the committee chair, we are kicking that effort off today. We envision this will take some time as we fully explore the topic, understand what additional information may be needed, and discuss issues, concerns, and possibilities. As the director said, it will be critical to have a sound technical basis as to the viability of these projects, and if there are potential impacts or not to those who hold surface water rights, and to have meaningful discussion. Next slide, please. First, I should acknowledge the term recharge is applied broadly to a wide range of projects. It is important to keep in mind that regulatory and permitting requirements for recharge projects vary depending on the location, scale, type of water utilized, and intent. These projects often have multiple benefits. Today's presentation is focused at the regional scale on the potential for recharge of floodwaters. We can, and probably should, explore the potential for projects at other scales at future meetings as well. Next slide, please. We are pleased to have ADWR Senior Research Hydrologist Keith Nelson join us today to discuss the potential for enhanced recharge of stormwater at the regional scale. Following the presentation, we invite this committee to begin that meaningful discussion that the director called for. To that end, we suggest a couple of guiding questions to keep in mind. What needs to be better understood from a technical, regulatory, or legislative perspective in order to move forward with these discussions? And what hurdles will need to be overcome to make this a viable water augmentation solution? And with that, I will hand it off to Keith. Keith, if you are ready to present.
Yes, I am. Good morning,
Terrific.
everybody.
Thank you.
I'm getting a little bit of an echo in my ears, so I'm going to remove my earplugs. So if anybody has any questions, just put something in the chat box and I will respond accordingly. Thank you. All right, well, again, good morning, everybody. Today, I'm going to talk about enhanced aquifer recharge. At the very least, I hope to start a discussion that may be passed on to future generations regarding this topic. But before I do, I thought I would share some information that provides a segue to this discussion. For many years, I've been hearing that 98% of all the precipitation that falls does not reach the aquifer and groundwater flow systems. And again, I've been hearing this number for many years from different people at different times. In fact, it might even predate my my time as a hydrologist. I didn't really know what to make of that number before I was into modeling. I thought the number was a little bit high, but I just didn't know what to make of it. And then a couple of weeks ago, I was at a meeting and Director Bashosky himself mentioned the term 89%. I'm not exactly sure what the context was. So I took that as an action item to actually make these calculations just to see what it all means. So I selected 3 regional scale groundwater flow systems, each differing in scale and in operation. I selected the Wilcox Basin, which is a very large alluvial filled basin, and then I selected the groundwater flow system associated with the Prescott Active Management Area, which consists of an upper alluvial aquifer and a lower volcanic unit aquifer. And then finally, I selected a stream aquifer system in the Santa Cruz Active Management Area. So I crunched the numbers, and for Wilcox and for Prescott, it was a dead ringer for 98%. I don't know if I was as surprised with the numbers as I was with a consistency with that 98%. So then I asked our Tucson modelers, who are currently finishing up the calibration and update of the Tucson Active Management Area groundwater flow model, and they too came up with a number 97 plus or minus some change. So in my eyes, the stock and share price of whoever coined that term, 98%, seemed to be, it seems to have some real heft and gravity to it. But then I calculated that ratio for the Santa Cruz Active Management Area, which is a stream aquifer system, and I did not get 98. I got the transpose. I got 89%, and then I calculated again another way. There is some subjectivity in the magnitude of precipitation that falls over an area, and I got 90%. So I guess that is about as good of a segue as I can give for the presentation I'm going to give today. And try to explain why Santa Cruz, in terms of natural recharge, is so much more efficient than the other 3 basins I just mentioned. And so, really that first bullet, we're really interested ostensibly in taking advantage of precipitation that otherwise would just simply evaporate. And based on these calculations, which I now have great confidence in, basically that's saying we got 98% of the bucket to work with. 2% we're going to assume is sort of off limits. Those are already in direct hydraulic connection with the aquifer system. So I think that gives us reason to hope in the future that we have such a large bucket to work with. And again, really, a lot of this is dependent on location, location, location. It just so happens the Santa Cruz and perhaps some other systems are gifted in the natural resources and the topography. They already have, I guess you can say, inherent enhanced recharge. And so part of the discussion is also going to be based on what might potentially be done to other areas. Next slide, please. And so again, I'm going to double down a little bit on the Santa Cruz active management area and explain why even during these last 20, 25 years of very dry conditions, for all practical purposes, the Santa Cruz active management area, especially south of Tucson, I would consider in a state of dynamic equilibrium. And so I'll go over that. And then also I was going to focus on the Prescott active management area, where myself and some other folks have done some preparation work, and we all think that water can be augmented using certain techniques. I'll go over real topically those topics. Next slide, please. And so why am I even talking about this? Well, the cold, hard truth, or maybe the dry, warm truth is many of our regional scale groundwater flow systems are in overdraft. When I started thinking about all this, I was primarily focusing on the remote AMAs in rural Arizona, but it probably could extend to, other areas without a doubt. And so, as I mentioned, looks like we have about 98% of the bucket that we have available to try to do something with the water before it evaporates. Living in Arizona, of course, we frequently have single-digit humidity as opposed to places like Florida. So I think a common enemy for all of us is evaporation. And that's one of the things that makes the Santa Cruz active management area really so efficient, because the aquifers are so receptive to periods of flood recharge when they occur. And then at the other end of the spectrum, this is far down the road. Once we have all our ducks in order, I think there's the potential to even mitigate peak flood periods due to implementing concepts such as induced recharge. And then finally, I'm going to just touch real briefly on two generalized different components of natural recharge: mount front recharge / mountain block recharge. Many times we can't differentiate mount front recharge from mountain block recharge, and why it's important to categorize that differently than main stem concentrated flood recharge along main stems, such as the Gila River and the San Pedro and the Santa Cruz and the Verde. They should be treated differently. So next slide, please. And so this gives you a quick snapshot of some of the long-term, the annualized long-term average of net changes in storage in the aquifer systems. We just finished updating the Prescott AMA groundwater flow model. The calibration covers about 80 years, and the long-term annualized overdraft is, we're looking at over 7,000 acre feet per year. I typically like annualizing these overdraft rates because the numbers are smaller and more digestible. So Prescott's an interesting case where statistically about 3 out of 4 years, the aquifer systems are in pretty serious overdraft, but approximately 1 out of 4 years, they experience very heavy snow and rain conditions, predominantly in winter up in Prescott, and those periods yield significant amounts of flood recharge. And then you can see some of the overdraft in some of the other regional scale systems. It's interesting that the long-term, the long-term overdraft, in the Wilcox and Tucson AMA are pretty comparable, approximately about 80,000 acre feet out of balance. But the current trends of the last few decades couldn't be more different. Tucson AMA has benefited greatly from the importation of renewable supplies into some of the USF sites, CAPSAR, SAPSAR, Pima Mine. And so collectively as a whole, not locally, but collectively, the Tucson AMA is currently very close to being in balance. Wilcox, it's just the exact opposite. Last couple of decades, pumping has increased significantly, and post 2015, which is just after the calibration period of the model, all indications are that groundwater levels are dropping at rates which suggest much higher pumping rates post 2015 in Wilcox. And then you got Santa Cruz, at least the southern 3/4 of Santa Cruz. Again, it's sort of in a state of dynamic equilibrium. Again, even during these drought periods, without the luxury of having imported surface water. So those are some of the overdraft rates we're talking about. Next slide, please. And then over on the western side of the state, you know, we're also seeing pretty significant declines in certain areas. The western basins, including Renegris and McMullen, you can see groundwater levels, especially recently, have taken a significant decline. And then up in the Kingman area, where the folks are being very proactive, I'll get to that in a minute, but they're also experiencing some significant declines. And all of these areas currently are totally groundwater based. Next slide, please. So, excuse me again, I'm sorry. So I'm going to tell you why the city of Nogales really operates their system, in my opinion, very, very efficiently. The annualized groundwater demand for the city of Nogales is approximately 5,000 acre feet a year. Historically, they get about 50% of that from what we call the Potrero well field, which is more of a typical classical groundwater flow basin, although data is increasingly showing that even that groundwater basin is receiving quite a bit of renewable water from flood recharge and mountain front recharge. And then they get about half of their recharge from the Santa Cruz well field, a thin shoestring aquifer that is necessarily very narrow, but the permeability and transmissivity of the stream aquifer system is very high, such that we see very rapid declines in the absence of flood recharge events. But then when flood recharge events occur, water levels rise extraordinarily fast. In the city of Nogales, they prefer to use water from the Santa Cruz well field for several reasons. One, because it's renewable. Two, because the water quality is excellent. Even the sedimentation floodwaters is not a problem. Three, the water table elevation it's variable, but it's approximately 100 feet higher than the pressure head associated with the Potrero well field. So the lift costs are less. And then also when the Santa Cruz well field is executed, that leaves the Potrero well field more time to recover. And so those hydrographs on the bottom from left to right reflect the groundwater system in Potrero and the Santa Cruz well field. And so you can basically think of the Santa Cruz well field as a series of surface water reservoirs that are basically just filled with sand and gravel. The transmissivities are extraordinarily high and water gets in there very quickly. But then again with Potrero, what we've seen too with the data in Potrero is that once wells commence pumping, there's a period of mining from storage. But what the data is increasingly showing us is that even that development flow regime might even be migrating towards also a period of long-term dynamic equilibrium. And just to note, when a groundwater well is pumped, water is derived either from storage or the cones of depression propagate out to other hydraulic surface water sources or even subsurface water. And water can be what we call captured from those boundaries with other water sources. So keep that in mind. Next slide, please. And so the graph there in the red and blue show in no uncertain terms the relationship between surface water flow in blue and then groundwater levels in red. And the groundwater levels were taken near the confluence. So I'll talk about that map on the left in a second. But the water levels are recorded in the well right near the confluence of the Santa Cruz River, Sonata Creek, and Nogales Wash. And you can see the immediate response of groundwater level changes based on the pumping regime. So it was a bit of dumb luck, but we installed a pressure transducer in the summer of 2000, and water levels were at a relatively low location. And then in October and November, some very, very large flood events pulsed their way through the Santa Cruz Active Management Area and basically topped out the aquifer where it existed. But then following that, we entered a very dry period of 4 to 5 years where water levels just cratered for that period. And in fact, the areas where the hydrographs show their minimum point, excuse me, those were the times when a significant tree die-off was noted. And that is also the period when the base flow in the San Pedro River went to zero for the first time. But then starting, especially in 2006, some pretty active monsoons brought the groundwater levels back up. So that map on the map on the left-hand side of the screen shows the Santa Cruz River in blue, the Sonata Creek watershed in green, and the Nogales Wash in red. And then the yellow line represents another fairly significant contribution to the Santa Cruz River system. And what makes this system work so well is the fact that you have these surface water sources from different areas, all converging into an aquifer system that has extraordinarily high transmissivity, very high permeability. The model dictates that. Back when I worked in the field, I conducted aquifer tests that also show that the hydraulic conductivity is near 1,000 feet per day. It's well known that wells in that area produce thousands of gallons a day. We have records in our GWSI database that show wells producing over 4,000 gallons a minute with almost no drawdown. And Schwalen even reported a well that pumped 5,000 gallons a minute. So basically all of these tributaries converge into a system which receives this water with extraordinarily high efficiency. And the good thing is it goes underground, so it's not subject to evaporation. And so it's interesting too that, especially during the monsoon season where we know flows are very localized, you know, a 2-inch downpour in any one of those 4 watersheds will converge into that hub area and recharge the aquifer. So it's very localized. And also, we think the flows in the Nogales Wash, all else equal, are increasing because of increasing urbanization. The Nogales Wash in red, it's a 100 square mile watershed that's impervious in a lot of places naturally, but growth in Nogales, Arizona, and especially in Nogales, Sonora, make the runoff component even larger. So if any of you folks, if you've never seen the Nogales Wash flowing bank to bank, put it on your bucket list. It's quite a sight to behold. So next slide, please. And here's another slide that I think elucidates the induced recharge concept. Sort of, I guess you can think of it as a man-made induced recharge concept. The hydrograph you see with the blue and the red represents 2 realizations of a stochastic ensemble we developed for risk analysis in the Santa Cruz Active Management Area. But what you need to know is the blue line represents historical average pumping rates. And the red line represents the same exact situation, but more a larger groundwater pumping demand has been exerted on the system. And so you can see when the recharge events occur, we have, the water levels are very comparable. And the difference is exploited during dry periods. And so during those dry periods, we see higher pumping. It creates more storage space for subsequent aquifer recharge. So thinking ahead in the future, really, if we, again, down the road, if we have all our ducks in a row, we can conceivably use thoughtful pumping regimes to create basically hydraulic barriers, because if an aquifer is full and you get a big recharge event, there's nowhere for the water to go. So it could go downstream, so you could actually control water that way. And by the way, that photograph on the left represents a well associated with the Santa Fe Ranch, just below the city of Nogales well field. And it's kind of a shame because they just refurbished that well in the summer of 2000, and that large 2000 flood just wiped it out. So again, this could be something where very thoughtful long-term planning, we might be able to preclude peak flood conditions if they occur. Next slide, please. Okay, so I told you about the Santa Cruz Active Management Area and a system that is very efficient in accepting natural recharge. The Prescott AMA isn't quite naturally as fortunate, unlike Santa Cruz, where all the flow lines are sort of convergent toward the river. Prescott, it's a little bit more complicated than that. The last few model updates have shown a strong trend where about 2/3 of all the natural recharge that occurs in the Prescott Active Management Area occurs along ephemeral tributaries and streams in the area, primarily Granite Creek and portions of Lower Link Creek and portions of the Agua Fria River, and then some tributaries off the Bradshaws. The remaining 1/3 of the natural recharge comes from mountain front recharge areas. And those are represented by the red rectangles. So as you can see, in the flows that occur to the tributaries, Granite Creek and Lynx Creek, really the water that supplies that is from the Bradshaw Mountains in the southern portion of that particular map. So really what that means is that much of the precipitation that falls on the valley flatlands, really they simply evaporate. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a minute, just due to the soils. But water that makes it to known areas where recharge occurs with high efficiency, say for example Granite Creek, that gets in the system. But everything else, it really does not percolate or infiltrate down even to the upper aquifer. Next slide, please. And so about 10 years ago, I've been working on and off on the Prescott model for many years. And about 10 years ago, I got a call from a civil engineer who was working on infrastructure related projects with a big Chino. But he became extraordinarily interested in water issues in Prescott. And this gentleman rolled up his sleeves and went to town. He's looked at thousands of well, like us, he's looked at thousands of well logs, plus even numerous, perhaps thousands of soil profiles, getting down to the nitty gritty of the physics of why loam and soil preclude movement of water, vertical movement of water. And him and I basically came to the same conclusions independently, me through groundwater flow modeling and looking close at mass balances, and him from a civil engineering perspective. And we both came to the conclusions that precipitation falling on valley flats, unless you can get it to a location where recharge occurs, it literally will just evaporate. And through modeling, this can be tested. Every model I've built in the last 10 years, I've actually tested this out. What you can do is you can assign a parameter and then constrain the available observation data, and see if, if that parameter provides recharge or not. And I can say for many aquifer systems, including this, there's very little, if any, recharge that occurs along the valley flat areas. So it's always nice when you're a groundwater flow modeler, it's always nice to have independent corroborating information sort of converge and become congruent. Next slide, please. And Doug went as far as, calculating transport profiles from areas that are not receptive to recharge, or areas that are showing signs of increasing urbanization, subdivisions, roads, and things like that. And he's determined several paths that through gravity can be conveyed over to Granite Creek, where we know recharge is very efficient. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so there's for Prescott, and what I'm saying, of course, is I broad brushed it. It's much more detailed than what I'm talking about. I'm basically just playing a chess game with water from 30,000 feet. But some of us know beyond a reasonable doubt that with 98% of the bucket to work with, we can probably make something happen with water that otherwise evaporates. But the map on the right side of the screen, you don't need to know the units or anything, but just know that the red colors represent areas that have a higher resistance to groundwater flow. And then as you transition from the warm colors to the cool colors, you have a more direct vertical connection from the upper alluvial aquifer, which will receive the recharge, to the lower volcanic unit aquifer, which is the aquifer that is most exploited for groundwater development. And so you can see in the map the areas where you start transitioning from warm to cool. You see that there is and can and will be a vertical connection. But some areas that are the warm color, there's a significant impediment to flow. So if you're interested in recharging an area, and if you wanted to get it down to the lower volcanic unit, some areas are better than others. And there seems to be a sweet spot just to the west of Granite Creek, which could provide opportunities in that direction. Next slide, please. I'd like to show this slide that's in yellow on the left-hand side of the screen. It's a map generated by the United States Geologic Survey by Freethy and Anderson, and it shows pre-development groundwater contours covering, looks like, a good part of Cochise County. And from left to right, we have the San Pedro Basin, and then we have the Wilcox Basin in the middle, and then we have the San Simon Basin over on the east. Some of it laps over into New Mexico. So anyway, I like to show this because it really illustrates, in my opinion, the difference between concentrated convergent flow towards, in this case, a river system, and how that contrasts from Wilcox and San Simon in the center and off to the east, where most of the recharge occurs as mountain front recharge. And so whenever you see these flat contours, which, for argument's sake, we're going to say they approximately parallel the topography of the land surface, which back in pre-development, it's generally a pretty safe assumption. And so you can see how broad and flat and how widely spaced the contours are in San Simon and Wilcox. But in San Simon, again, they converge toward the river. And the reason why I like this in pre-development, because if I would have picked a post-development contour for Wilcox and San Simon, the contour intervals would be extremely complicated. And it's just sort of an interesting historical note that in pre-development, the water table elevations were lowest around the playa. But now moving forward 75, 80 years, the water tables around the playa are now at a relative high, sort of an island amidst cones of depression, both to the north and to the south. And so I wanted just to highlight the differences again between mountain front recharge and main stem convergent flow toward recharge areas. And as I did with Prescott, I basically confirmed that with the exception of incidental agricultural recharge, which is another important source of recharge in Wilcox, there is effectively no natural recharge that follows this precipitation that makes it into the aquifer systems in Wilcox. And so natural recharge is pretty much restricted to mountain front areas. And in terms of our understanding mountain front recharge rates and where they occur and how much, there's not much data out there. We have high confidence in the overall mountain front recharge rates through groundwater flow modeling, but in a sense, it's a black box. And so if, down the road, years down the road, if somebody wanted to try to enhance mountain front recharge, in my opinion, it wouldn't be the lowest hanging fruit. It would probably be a difficult undertaking simply because it's a diffuse rate. Access would be very difficult. Not saying it can't happen, but it would be more challenging. Next slide, please. And now, basically, I just want to give a shout out to some folks in Mojave County who are doing some really good work, and they're also doing some good work in the San Pedro. I'm not going to go into that today. I don't know that system as well as I know the systems around it. That could be a topic for a whole other presentation. I have a contact email at the end of the slideshow if you're interested. So next slide, please. So the good folks up in Mojave County are doing some really wonderful things. A few years ago, several of us at the department were involved with studying the hydrology in the northwest basins. And this is when I first learned of this enhanced recharge project. And so more recently, I reached out to Nick Hunt. I think he was the gentleman behind this all. And I was very pleasantly surprised at the work they're doing. It's nice to know that instead of when precipitation comes, it doesn't converge into detention basins to evaporate, why they made infiltration basins. And so that's the kind of forward thinking that I think people need to go into. Next slide, please. And I say this because I actually grew up in Mojave County in a place that's even hotter and drier than Kingman, and it is indeed very dry. But I also know that the Hualapai Mountains, just to the east and southeast of town, are a significant mountain range, and they pack quite a nice orographic punch. And so you can see Nick Hunt and the folks in Mojave County and Kingman, it seems like they're definitely on top of it. And that slide over on the right-hand side delineates a watershed and how it converges to a point. I don't know the details of these plans. I provided a contact information for Mr. Hunt for those of you who are interested in learning more about it. But anyway, I want to compliment them on the work they've done. I think it's outstanding. Next slide, please. And this is a slide I took from one of Doug McMillan's presentations. Well, Doug's done a lot of work in Arizona. He's originally from California, and he's aware of some of the efforts that are occurring in California. And I just thought this was interesting. They just talk about a little stretch of freeway covering 320 acres provides an estimated annual recharge rate of 1,000 to 1,500 acre feet a year. And we all know LA is about freeways. So it's nice to see that other people are thinking in this direction. And again, let me just step back. What I'm talking about is I'm leaving out many, many technical details and many, many non-technical details. And it's much more complicated than what I'm just generalizing here in this presentation. But maybe in the future we can get into more detailed aspects of this. So next slide, please. And I couldn't finish this presentation without giving you a story from my backyard. Back in September 2014, I don't know if you folks, some of you folks probably live in the Southeast Valley. We were inundated with 5 inches of precipitation in 5 hours, and I'm not exaggerating. It was a real freak. And so I was woken up by lightning and thunder every hour, and after about 4 or 5 hours, I gave up and drove to work. And I came home, and the schools were all flooded out, and my backyard backs up to a green belt. But it was blue that particular day, and I saw kids, dogs, people canoeing and floating down the green belt just like it was a river. And I don't know ultimately what happened to all of that water, but I know a lot of it just ended up being redirected to the Pecos Park. It's a large park with soccer fields, and it ended up flooding that basin out. And most of that water probably just ended up evaporating. I know weeds became prolific in the downstream area. When these events occur, it's important to capitalize it. I calculated the overall volume of recharge on the back of an envelope, and it for my area probably amounted to about 5,000 acre feet. And 5,000 acre feet in Phoenix is small potatoes, but in aggregate and for other areas, it's a lot of water. And then that other slide is it's a slide from Doug McMillan again, and he calculated the monsoon season alone in 2014 provided over 5,000 feet of runoff. And again, in Phoenix, that's not a big number, but it's probably about the annualized demand for the city of Prescott for a year. Next slide. And so this is my last slide. I have some contact information, but just a final parting thought on where we might be going in the future. We've all heard that the future, we're going to be generally getting drier and warmer, where the dries and warmers are drier and warmer. And I've also heard when the wet periods come, they are wetter. So that prognosis for locations like the Rocky Mountains or the Sierra Nevadas, it's probably not a good prognosis. But is the guy behind the dials developing the models? These types of storms provide a staggering amount of water and staggering amount of recharge when they occur. And if these storms get more frequent and more problematic and wetter, I can't help but think that if we engage in proper planning, we can capture a larger percent of the waters from these particular events. For example, the 1983 flood, afterwards, it kept many ephemeral and intermittent streams in southern Arizona running perennially for 2 or 3 years. So that they contain a staggering amount of water. And so it might not necessarily be a bad thing for certain areas if we prepare for them. And here's some contact information. My contact information is in there. And I also provided Doug McMillan's, Nick Hunt's, and Alejandro Barcenas, who is the Public Works Director for Nogales. And I've also included Laura Locker. She's done a lot of modeling work in the San Pedro. And so I would, if you are interested in more technical details in some of these areas, I would encourage you to reach out to these individuals. Not only are they very knowledgeable, it's nice talking with these folks because they're very passionate, because they're the boots on the ground, and they know that recharge can be enhanced with proper planning. And I think I will stop there.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? I don't see, do we see hands up?
Wade, why don't we give it just a moment? I know that Keith has unpacked a lot of information. So while we have him with us as a technical expert, it'd be great to pick his brains if anybody has any questions. And if you'd rather not use the chat, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in as well.
And again, feel free to contact me if you have any questions. All my contact information is there. And thank you all very much.
Okay, well, Keith, I'll hit you up with a question if you don't mind.
Sure.
Something I'm curious about. So if you said that probably 2% of the water is percolating into the aquifer, and the rest is lost to evaporation. So where in the equation is the water that would be flowing in streams and rivers that users would otherwise divert? How does that figure into the calculation?
Well, from a modeling perspective, again, I put those directly in as recharge numbers. So, you know, if you know, the recharge that ultimately leads to groundwater discharge, like, for example, for base flow, you know, those are inherently included within the mountain front recharge rates. If it's along a river where we see gaining and losing reaches, you know, that water, whatever water infiltrates would have been a component of my recharge calculation. So I include both the mountain front recharge in that calculation, as well as any stream infiltration that occurs along main stem. So yeah, that's a different way to look at 98%, is that for every drop that falls as precipitation, makes it to the aquifer in Wilcox, Tucson, and Prescott, we have 5 drops that make it into the Santa Cruz active management area. And a lot of that in the Santa Cruz active management area really occurs through the concept of induced recharge. We get these big flows along the river, but we also have groundwater development adjacent to the river, so that creates storage space for subsequent induced recharge. So I don't know if I answered your question, but hopefully that's a start.
Okay, thank you for that.
We do have some comments in the chat now, so I will read those out. Chris Udall said, great presentation. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
E. Helper is the name. Do you have any estimates about the volume of water that could be captured through enhanced recharge projects?
No, I don't offhand. But the good news is we got 98% of the bucket to work with. So again, you know, before I calculated those numbers, before I was a hydrologist, I would have said that 98%. Intuitively, it seemed very high. But yeah, in terms of estimates, I don't know, but some of us know, you know, in the Prescott area, you know, if we didn't have any other, you know, non-technical impediments, it would be augmented. To what extent, I don't know.
Okay, a question from Kevin Rogers. What would you consider the low-hanging fruit?
Well, simply because I know the Prescott groundwater flow systems so very well. Again, the slide I showed conveying water that otherwise would just evaporate to Granite Creek. You know, that obviously that would take much planning and permitting, but that from a technical standpoint would be relatively low-hanging fruit, and that should be contrasted with what I was talking about with mountain front recharge. I think that would be that would be a difficult nut to crack, at least at this time. And the cold hard truth is maybe a lot of these mountain front or block recharge areas are already efficient. So maybe we couldn't even enhance it. So I guess most of my interest is probably directed towards, you know, areas with main stems, working with gravity. So.
Okay. Lonnie Frost, how is stormwater capture affected by the surface water adjudication process?
Yes, well, I am not touching those questions. This was just to talk about wet water, and I used to be in groundwater management. I appreciate those questions, and that's something that will need to be addressed at some point. But this presentation is not for that. This really is just looking at the potential feasibility within the context of our current overdraft situation in many areas, especially, you know, the remote AMAs and portions of rural Arizona.
Well, I was just going to let everyone know that, oops, I'm getting some bad echo there. Okay, seems to have been fixed. We have Jennifer Heim and Jeff Heilman, attorneys from the department staff, with us today on the call if they would like to address that question.
Sure. I mean, I think it's difficult to speak about these projects in the abstract and how they might intersect with the surface water statutes. To the extent that water is being used, which might be defined as public waters under 45-141, it might implicate the surface water statutes, something that we need to consider going forward. But, you know, speaking of it just in the abstract sense, without looking at the project in a project by project basis, is kind of difficult. Jennifer, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add.
No, I don't. I would just echo that obviously whether or not a project would divert, you know, appropriable water is obviously a question, you know, in a way that could impact vested surface water rights is a question that would have to be wrestled with.
Hi, Carol, could I make a comment? This is Bruce Hallen with SRP.
Good morning, Bruce. I would say so.
Yeah, I appreciate the presentation and I appreciate the input from DWR's attorneys, but I think it's very, very important that you don't gloss over these issues associated with surface water rights. Its flood flows are the actual water that is being captured within these, either these stock ponds, these stock tanks, or the reservoirs that we operate. So it's very, very important that everyone understands that, you know, that water is being appropriated and being utilized. You know, you don't want to divert water out of Granite Creek. You know, that water then essentially helps support the subflow of Granite Creek so that the next precipitation event that comes along, all of a sudden Granite Creek has a much stronger surface water flow. And so I just don't want us to gloss over those issues based off of what was presented today.
Well, in terms of Granite Creek, we weren't talking about diverting. We were talking about actually recharging along the creek in an efficient manner. So
yeah, if you recharge in the creek so that you can support the flow of the creek, that would make sense.
Yeah, and Bruce, to your point, the consideration of surface water flows and surface water rights is obviously very important to this discussion, and something that move forward.
Okay. There's a comment from Haley Paul. Ephemeral streams, in general, how helpful are they in recharging the aquifer in the valley floors? Can we promote / enhance aquifer recharge by maintaining ephemeral streams?
where in the context of location, were you talking about the Phoenix AMA?
And Haley, you can feel free to unmute yourself and flesh out your question further if you'd like.
Yeah, sorry, crying baby. Yeah, anywhere, I think. I know that's a kind of a broad question, but I was just kind of thinking in general, the impact that ephemeral streams have on recharge.
Yeah, in the context of mountain front recharge, they're very important. The water that flows from the tributaries off the Chiricahuas before it hits the valley flats. Again, that's all wrapped up within the mountain front recharge component. So ephemeral recharge reaches are extremely important.
Okay. Another question from Ben Bryce. How would channeling efforts to ensure better recharge impact Valley's flat ecosystems? For example, would that negatively impact forage on rangelands, or is the benefit from major storms too short to make a meaningful difference?
Yeah, I don't have an explicit answer to those questions. And again, a major point that I was trying to make in this presentation is that all recharge areas are not equal. And so, you know, it's imperative that if we move forward with something like this, we really understand what areas are receptive to recharge and what areas are not. I've been surprised by some area. I've mostly talked about areas that are very conducive to very highly efficient recharge, like along the Santa Cruz, the Gila River, and certain losing stretches. We see massive recharge rates, but some areas have surprised me and have not shown much recharge. The jury's not out on it, but I've been very surprised at the lack of recharge in the lower Big Chino Wash. The department has installed some transducers, and unlike many other areas I've modeled, very little recharge occurs along that reach. And time permitting, I'm trying to update the San Simon model, and I've been very surprised at how little recharge occurs off of Cave Creek, which drains the highest portion of the Chiricahua Mountains. So not all areas are equal. And a lot of this really is predicated on understanding the regional scale hydrology and what areas indeed are receptive. And sometimes it's not safe to assume. Regional scale models, in my opinion, are probably the best tool to address this sort of feature. Thank you.
Okay, a question in the chat from Henry Day. Is the Agua Fria River above the Gila a good location for enhanced recharge?
The Gila. Well, as I understand the Agua Fria above the Gila, there's an impound structure, Lake Pleasant, and I'm personally not very familiar with the Agua Fria. I'm familiar with the Agua Fria watershed, and I know how productive it is in wet years, but I cannot speak of what happens along that reach. I know there are USFs and maybe even some in-stream sites, but that's not my area of expertise.
Comment from Sandy Favorites. Bruce makes a great point, and we need to address this in the context of potential augmentation projects. We do not want to promote something where there is still significant unanswered legal questions.
I can speak to that, and thanks, Bruce and Sandy. To the extent I gave the impression that we are glossing over how this might relate to the surface water statutes and the adjudication, that was not my intention. We're very aware that that is something that needs to be looked at very closely, and it's at the forefront of our minds as we are evaluating these types of projects.
And Carol, can I respond to that real quick? This is Sandy.
Yeah.
Sorry. And Keith,
Hi,
that
Sandy.
wasn't, I don't think that was intended. There was no intention towards you. I think it's just, I think both Bruce very well made the point, and I think I'm just backing him up that these legal questions need to be discussed. So don't take it. You did great. Thanks for the presentation.
Thanks, Sandy. And I would just like to, this is Carol again, I'd like to add that, the director made it a point to note that it is really going to be critical to have a sound technical basis as well as a sound understanding of whether or not there are impacts to those who hold surface water rights. So all of these are extremely valid points that we definitely want to keep in mind moving forward, and that's exactly what we were hoping to start generating with today's discussion, was an understanding and an identification of some of these issues. So we really appreciate the conversation and keep bringing it. I think there's some other comments. Jenna, is that correct?
Yes, there are a couple comments. A comment from Doug Dunham. One of the things the committee should look at is specific locations versus annual averages over an entire watershed, given the spotty nature of storm events.
Okay.
And a comment from Nicholas Ballack. If sheet flow or flood flows that have not historically reached a perennial waterway with pre-existing water rights be allowable for stormwater harvesting, capture, and be used for recharge. And Nicholas, I know that's a question, so if you want to elaborate on that, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes, hi. So yeah, the question is, if there is flood flows that hasn't historically reached a perennial waterway, where there is already a allocation for water, would that flood flow be allowable for its capture and subsequent recharge?
This is Jennifer with the department, and I don't know if that's, if you're asking for sort of like a legal analysis of that. I would be very reluctant to just give a sort of broad answer in the abstract. I understand what you're saying, that it historically has never reached a perennial stream. Off the top of my head, I can't think of reasons why that might not be allowed, but I don't want to step out ahead of anything. And I would want to analyze an actual proposal before I gave us a definitive answer on that question.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay. There is a question in the chat from Senator Otondo. Senator Otondo, if you want to. Great.
Yeah, thank you. I was recently invited to a demonstration in Tucson by a technology company because this conversation is also discussing, 98% of precipitation loss. What this company basically does is pull that precipitation, the water from the air. They're doing demonstrations, I guess, in Tucson. Did you know anything about this? Is this also an option? I was contemplating going to see this demonstration, and I'm afraid I'm quite ignorant on that subject with this type of technology.
Yes, I've never heard of that before, so I'm unfamiliar with it. So I'm reluctant to provide a comment. But if it's related to, condensation, it could be very interesting. And again, I guess one point, again, looking at our groundwater levels and our overdraft situation, nothing is immediate and critical. But in the very long term, doing nothing really isn't an option as we go forward and if pumping rates continue. So I just thought I'd throw that in there.
And just to that point, or if there's anybody that would like the information that I received and would like to join me to go see exactly what this company is about and what they're doing, I'd be more than happy to help. I'm hesitant to write the name of any company because I don't try to promote private companies, but I think it would be interesting. So please let me know. Perhaps, Wade, you'd be interested in the information and I could provide that to you as chairman of the Water Augmentation Committee. Thank you.
Yes, that I would be very interested. Thank you for that.
Carol, do we have any other questions or comments? I'm not seeing them in the chat.
No, there's no other comments or questions in the chat.
Well, I believe that we continue with the Carol Ward Show. Number 3. 4.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to provide a brief update on the work of the Storage Site Committee. As you will recall, working with the committee, Representative Griffin, and the Storage Sites Committee, the department and ASLD expanded the potential water storage sites on ASLD trust land report that was done in 2017 to include 331 potential underground storage sites on state land. The report has been finalized and that is ready to submit well ahead of its December 31st due date, so we should be accomplishing that soon. As a result of the discussions that we had during the process of updating that report, and with the input and assistance from members of the committee and the subcommittee, the department has also developed a guide to assist stakeholders at the local level in winnowing down potential sites to those that would suit their specific needs and capabilities. The draft guide was wrapped up in late June and then shared with the committee for feedback. Comments were due July 16th. We want to thank all of those who did submit comments. I had optimistically hoped that we would have that document completed, incorporating those comments, and then formatting the document and get that back out to the committee by the end of July, but we've had a very busy few weeks here at the department, and we'll need a little more time to incorporate those comments and finish up the document, but that project is nearing completion at this point. We do hope we should be able to accomplish that by the end of the month. So that is an outcome we can look forward to in the near future. With that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
We'll give them a minute or so to take all that in and digest it, refilter it. Not seeing anyone jump on the chat or with questions. Let's move on to our next item, which is next steps. Where do we go with the things that we're developing at this point?
Okay, well, we will be, I think, wrapping up the work of the Storage Sites Subcommittee, as I just said. So the next steps for this group would be continuing to move this conversation forward around the potential for additional aquifer recharge from stormwater. And I think maybe what we should do is staff maybe can get together with you, Mr. Chair, and discuss the feedback that we've gotten today, and then work on a strategy where we can present more information, perhaps dig deeper into some of these issues that have been raised at our next meeting. I think there's also the potential for exploring some of the recharge opportunities at other scales. Today, Keith Nelson really examined things at a regional level. There are other scales of these projects that we could also provide more presentations on. And I think that's really part of our charge, is to look at the potential at all of these different scales, and then what impediments there may be, policy considerations, that sort of thing. Your thoughts, Mr. Chair, or thoughts from the committee?
Let's give the committee an opportunity.
Be happy to.
We know there are those out there with thoughts. If you'd prefer to send them either to the chair or to Carol or Jenna, feel free to do so. But we want to move along in the efforts that we have started. We have still several of the tasks that we've undertaken that could be further refined. And we may perhaps look at some closure actions on some of them that we looked at. You know, you're not going to get closure on beatophyte management or forest health or weather modification. Those are continuing on. This storage sites, stormwater, those things also could bear further refinement, and the effort we made on helping people find financing for water projects. There will be from time to time additional updates that we could provide to the council so that those could be distributed. Any further comments? Are we looking at trying to schedule another meeting?
We will definitely get together with you and do that. I think we have a lot more to explore ahead of us.
We do. I think the next item is other. Is that what it is? Or next steps is the last?
That is the last slide.
Well, then, are there any comments or issues that anyone at this meeting wants to bring up? Then we will post as we have opportunities. As we attempt to schedule other meetings, we'll of course post those as well. As we close this meeting, I certainly want to thank Mr. Nelson, Carol, Jenna, for what they have done to make this meeting possible. These committee meetings and the council itself doesn't function without the strong help of ADWR staff and the guidance from the director and those working right next to him. We note that Jenna has been particularly busy today, manning the computers and all the other things that's going on in her life and trying to celebrate her birthday.
Happy birthday, Jenna. And I understand we have another birthday today. Keith Nelson, our presenter, is also celebrating.
Yeah,
what better
don't
way
remind
than
me.
to spend it?
Thank you.
You're getting dragged in, Keith. You're going down with me.
Yeah.
Real trooper, a real trooper.
To
Well,
both of
thank
you,
you.
many happy returns. You're very productive in what you do, and we appreciate that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
With that, we'll close the meeting. Again, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Wade. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.